everyone, Madeline Dell here, the Chapter Goddess. I am a mom, author, blogger, freelancer, podcaster, producer, and overall creative. With this show, I really want to focus on creatives and bring their authentic self to life. How are they motivated to pursue their passions? What have been the struggles along the way? Does self-care play an important role in who they are today and how they connect with the creative flow? Bringing one's authentic self to the forefront is important in this world that we live in currently. Sharing your self-care, your tips, and how you stay on track for things without losing it completely is also important. Self-care is not talked about enough, and authenticity and self-care are what I like to highlight with my creatives, as well as getting to know them. So get ready for a fun and entertaining show. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get ready to meet this episode's guest. Today's episode is sponsored by Creative Edge Publicity. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode with me, the Chapter Goddess. I have a fantastic guest for you guys to meet today. We're going to be chatting about his book, his work, life, and any other topics that may come up. I will tell you now that animals are definitely going to be in this conversation. So if you're an animal lover, get ready to have a good, entertaining conversation. But without further ado, let me bring him in and let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Mike or Michael Hingson. I don't care which. I am in California and we have animals here. We have a cat who loves to be petted while she eats. She doesn't want to eat unless I'm in there paying attention to her. And then I also have an almost 7-year-old black lab guide dog, because I happen to be blind, whose name is Alamo.
Aww.
And Alamo always wants attention, but he does put up with the cat as well.
Oh, yeah, guide dogs are pretty amazing. My best friend, hers is, he's a unique one. He's kind of silly. He's got quite the funny personality. So his name is Saturn, and it's just, he's amazing. But
well, Alamo, when I first met him, we went back to our room after meeting at Guide Dogs for the Blind up in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I'd sit down on the floor to talk with him. The next thing I know, he is in my lap, all 4 paws and everything. It turns out he thinks he is a 63-pound lap dog. And if anyone sits on the floor, he is in their lap.
Yes, that's precious. Does he still do that now?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh, my gosh.
As I said, it doesn't matter who it is. Anyone comes and visits. I ask them if they want to see his trick, and they say yes. If they do, it's their problem. I said, sit on the floor. And the next thing is there's this big 63-pound dog in their lap.
I love it. They're always the biggest, cuddly babies, no matter how big they are. So, I mean, because my parents have English Mastiffs that still believe they are lap dogs, and they're huge. But with a little less about, our current pets, let's go ahead and I want to dive in first off about your book, The Thunder Dog, because I know there is a lot of backstory that goes into that creation. So let's go ahead and start there and tell our viewers a little bit of what brought that about.
Sure. The title of the book is Thunder Dog, the story of a blind man, his guide dog, and the triumph of trust. And the book was written because on September 11th, 2001, I was the Mid-Atlantic region sales manager for a Fortune 500 computer company. We were in New York City. I had opened an office for Quantum Corporation the year before. And so on that day, we were going to be conducting some training seminars for some of our reseller partners in New York City. So we had a few early arrival guests and a colleague from our corporate office, David Frank, who was in. And yes, it was, as I said, on September 11th, and we were there when the terrorists attacked and crashed an aircraft into the building, 18 floors above us. So Thunderdog is the story of me growing up as a person who is blind. I've been blind my entire life. And me as a person going to school, going to college, getting a master's degree in physics, a secondary teaching credential, then working, and also telling our September 11th story. And the way the book is laid out actually is that every chapter starts with an event moving sequentially forward with each chapter, but an event of September 11th. And then we transition back in each chapter to lessons or things that I learned or accomplished along the way that helped me on September 11th. And then at the end of the chapter, we come back to September 11th. And the whole point of, I think, the book is it's not a September 11th story. If it's anything, it validates why I survived on September 11th by telling people that in reality, I learned the things that I needed to know in order to survive and escape September 11th and then move on from that day. So it is a story of survival. It's a story of blindness, and it's a story to help educate people to the fact that no matter what we typically think, disability does not mean a lack of ability, but in reality, disability is a characteristic that we all have. And so it isn't stated as such in Thunderdog, but the reality is every one of us has a disability. You have one, I have one, everyone has one. Your disability, at least in part, not knowing that much about you, but your disability is at least you're light dependent. The power goes out, you're in a world of hurt until you get another light to show you where you are or how to go where you need to go. Thomas Edison and other people invented the electric light, and it has become an all-pervasive technological tool in our world. But the reality still is the lights go out, you guys have a problem. The fact is it is still a disability, whether it's mostly covered up or not. And for blind people, it isn't so covered up because technology has taken a long time to catch up because it hasn't been the priority of most people. And that's okay. But the reality is we all have disabilities, and we shouldn't think less of someone because their so-called disability is different or what some people would say worse than ours, whatever that happens to mean, because we all have them.
That is a beautiful message, and one that I don't know why, but a lot of people have a problem like understanding that and accepting that message. And I say that from like experience. We talked a little bit about my best friend having a guide dog before the show. She lost her ability to walk when we were juniors in high school. And then I've also had my own personal experience with traumatic head injuries and brain injuries and stuff that we've overcome. But like people do, they challenge that whole concept and think you're less because you do have a disability. And it's so frustrating.
But it's what we teach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is that is what we as a society tend to teach. Oh, you're blind. You're not as good as a person who can see. You have less ability than a person who can see. And the reality is that's not true. It isn't even a different ability. It is that I'll use different tools to accomplish the same thing. Mm-hmm. But what we really need to do is to recognize and understand we have to change the meaning of the word disability. As I said, disability does not mean a lack of ability. And you can't separate it. People say, well, it starts off with dis, which is not or negative. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, diversity has eliminated the concept of disability for years.
Yep.
Because we don't talk about disabilities when we deal with diversity, even though it should be part of the difference. The fact of the matter is disability does not mean a lack of ability. Disability simply means we have a characteristic. And for some of us, it's a very visible characteristic. For others, it's not a visible characteristic. And for most people, it's a characteristic that has gotten covered up. And as a result, people don't see it. and don't want to think about it, but it's there. I was in a hotel a couple of weeks ago, and the power went out, and it was 3:30 in the afternoon, but the power went out in the hotel and the surrounding blocks. And you can only imagine the screams of people who weren't right where there was light and they didn't know what to do. And I'm sitting there going, what's the problem? The fact of the matter is, we all have challenges, we all have disabilities, we all have characteristics. Don't ever demean or denigrate anyone because what they have is different than what you have.
Yes. I love that, like 100%. And I love that you're putting that message out there and going and doing events and speaking and sharing that, you know?
Well, it's fun to do. I've been doing it ever since September 11th because people started asking me when the media got a hold of my story and started making us visible. People would call and say, would you come and talk with us and teach us the lessons we should learn from September 11th? And would you help us better understand blindness, or would you teach us what we need to know? And especially in the last few years, what I've realized is I talk a lot and do talk a lot about surviving on September 11th. But what I've not done is talked to people about a particular thing. And that is, I wasn't afraid on September 11th. And I say that in speeches. Oh, the fear was there, but it didn't, as I put it, blind me or overwhelm me, because I had spent a lot of time preparing for the possibility of an emergency on September 11th. But what I've not done is to teach other people how to deal with fear. And so what I am starting to do, oh, you have company.
Yes, the cat pushed the door open.
And so what I've started to do is to work toward teaching people that they don't need to be blinded by fear, no matter what is going on, whatever emergency, whatever challenge they're facing, that they can learn to control that fear and use it as a way to actually become more alert and become more able to respond to whatever comes their way. So it's something that we're working on. I'm actually working on a new book. Our working title is A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave, because dogs have been a part of my life. So we use the dogs and they've been a significant part of it. So we use the dogs as kind of the springboards and the way to talk about it. But it's there. And by the way, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about the book, it probably won't be published for another year, but you can go to a website we have created called blindedbyfear.net. So blindedbyfear.net, they can download a brief ebook that will talk some about how to deal with fear. And so it is there, and it's available to anyone who's interested in that. But the bottom line is that people really need not ever be overwhelmed by fear. You can learn to control how you react to things. As I tell people, we had no control over September 11th happening, and I'm not convinced that even in the best circumstances, we could have prevented it from happening. Some people may agree and may disagree, but this is just my thinking. But what we all have control over is how we dealt with September 11th and how we deal with any unexpected emergency in our lives.
Yeah. And I mean, I my own personal experience with 9/11, I was in the 5th grade. So I knew what was going on, but I didn't quite get the fear that like all the older adults were getting at the time. But it was not a light thing. And I'm curious to know, what is one of the lessons that you feel comfortable sharing that's not giving too much away from the book?
Well, and let me also say that I'm not surprised. Where were you on September 11th?
I was in my 5th grade class
Where was
at
that?
Denison Elementary in Idaho, Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
So
I was very far away from it, and
yeah.
we had one of the older TVs that was because the school did we were in a rural area. We way behind on getting new technology and stuff. So It was like one of the grainy old TVs hanging up in the room was airing what was going on, and we got bomb threats and everything. And my mom came and picked me and my siblings up, and like we went home. So
Well, the thing is that for most people in the country, no matter what, September 11th was as big as your TV screen, your radio speaker, or a newspaper picture that you saw. And I understand that. For those of us who were there, of course, it was different. But even when later that day I got up toward Midtown Manhattan, it was different than what it was downtown in the area near the World Trade Center, because the people up there, although I'm sure they saw, or some of them saw the airplanes flying into the towers and so on, they were still 3 and 4 miles away. So it wasn't even there quite the same. But today, of course, for most everyone, especially people who have been born since September 11th or who weren't old enough to really remember it well, it's history. And I appreciate that. So you asked one of the lessons, and one of the lessons that I talk a lot about in speeches that I give, and I'm always ready to travel and speak to organizations and companies and so on. But one of the topics that I discuss a lot is the concept of trust and teamwork, because working with a guide dog is all about trust and teamwork. People have some really significant misconceptions about what a guide dog is and what a guide dog does, and I want to explain that. The job of a guide dog is not to lead, and anyone, and I always try to make sure reporters understand this, and some of them still resist, but they talk about the guide dog led his blind or her blind owner out of the World Trade Center. Absolutely not. The guide dogs do not lead. That really implies that I'm just kind of following along and the dog knows what to do. I don't want my dog to know what to do. I don't want my dog to know where to go, because what that really means is I'm teaching the dog a particular way to go somewhere. What if that way is blocked?
Yeah.
It's my job to be, if you will, the navigator. I have to give the dog directions, tell the dog when to go left, tell the dog when to go right, and to go forward and so on. And that is true whether it's on September 11th or any other time. It's my job to know where to go and what to do and direct the dog. The dog's job is to make sure that we stay safe and to walk and stop if there's a curb or whatever the case happens to be. And a perfect example of that on September 11th is when we were running from the collapse of Tower 2. We got engulfed in the dust cloud. And so clearly we had to get out of it.
Yeah.
And the only way to do it was I was running next to a building on my right. So I started telling Roselle to go right, and giving her hand signals. And I don't know, or I didn't know whether she could hear me or see my hand signals, because David, who I was running with, said he couldn't see his hand 6 inches in front of his face. So I don't know whether she could see my hand signals and knew what I wanted or not. The noise of the tower collapsing was so loud, I didn't know whether she could hear me or not. But nevertheless, I still did what I would normally do, which is to tell her to go right, because I wanted her to go into the first opening she could find so that we could get into a building and out of a lot of the dust. Well, she did know what I wanted, because suddenly I heard an opening on my right and she turned into it, took one step and stopped and would not move. And it took me a few seconds to refocus and recognize she stopped for some reason. And I had to then decide or determine what the reason was. And so by reaching out with a hand along the wall and using and stepping or pushing a foot out, I discovered we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. She stopped at the stairs and she waited for the command that I needed to give her, which was forward.
Yeah.
And until I gave her the command forward, she wasn't going to budge. Well, I gave her the command forward and we walked down the stairs and found ourselves in the entrance to a subway station. The teamwork, whether it was on that day or any day, is what's really the message here. And we always work as a team. It's important for me as the team leader to respect both of us and to understand the job of each of us. And in fact, I expect my guide dogs, now Alamo, to do the same thing. We both have to have a respect for each other and our jobs and learn to work together seamlessly to accomplish whatever task that we do. Dog's job to make sure we walk safely, my job to tell the dog where I want the dog to go, and to make sure that the dog continues to be focused. So it's a team effort second to none. It's as close knit of a team as you would ever find if you're dealing with a good team in a corporation or SEAL Team 6 or any military organization or whatever, where there are close knit teams. It's exactly the same thing. That also means we have to trust each other. And so if the dog does something that I don't expect, the last thing I should do is negatively react to the dog. You dumb dog, what are you doing? That's not what I'm supposed to do. I need to investigate and find out why the dog is reacting. Now, there's always that slim 10 to the minus 23rd chance that the dog is reacting to a duck or something like that it saw.
Yeah.
Yes, it can happen. Dogs will be dogs. But I have to figure that out. And then if it, in fact, is a dog that being distracted and not doing what they're supposed to do, then the team has to have a discussion about the behavior of one of the members of the team. And there are ways to do that are not in a negative sense at all. I can give the dog a little bit of a leash correction, nothing violent, or I can say leave it, or just stop and tell the dog to sit and pet the dog. And when the dog is paying attention to me, give the dog a treat so the dog knows that it's supposed to be paying attention to me. And then we can go beyond the duck or whatever the case happens to be. But mostly, by very much in large, mostly, the dog doesn't do what I expect because there is some reason that the dog isn't doing what I expect. So it's my job to understand that I would be destroying the team efficacy if I didn't pay attention to the dog and recognize that the dog is probably doing something that I don't expect for a specific reason. And only when I figure out that there is not a real reason, that it's a distraction, then we'll have a discussion. But the reality is it's all about working together. And so trust and teamwork is absolutely a significant part of what I talk about in the world of nowadays, what happened on September 11th or any other time people want me to speak.
I like that. And two, just to elaborate more on guide dogs, like before you're given a guide dog, they make sure you're a good fit, right?
Yeah, they do. The process is a very complex and sophisticated one. When you are exploring getting a guide dog, there is somebody who will typically come from the school, unless you train your own. And there are some blind people who own or train their own dogs because they've had some education and expertise in that. But typically, a trainer from a guide dog school where you apply will come and talk with you. They'll walk with you. They will actually simulate a guide dog. They bring a harness and appropriate equipment to do what we call a Juno walk. And the whole idea of Juno is a fake dog. That's the trainer, and the trainer walks with you to observe how you walk, how fast you walk, how aggressively you walk, how confident you are at walking, how well you know your environment. And also the trainer will tell you, so now tell Juno go left or something like that, so that the trainer can see how you move with the dog. That's part of what they do. That's only a small part of it. But the trainers and the school get a lot of information about you and what you're like. And all that goes into them choosing the dog they believe is the best fit for you. Now, it is possible, and it does happen sometimes, not too often, that even then the fit isn't great, which means they'll find a different dog. But that whole process is important because, first of all, not any dog can be a guide dog. And secondly, not any person can be a person that uses a guide dog. But it has to be a match that will lead to a very good, solid bonding of the team.
Yes. And that is super important, the bond between you and the dog. And this, I'm going off experience from my best friend and her dogs. She's had two. Her first one was Eddie, and the second is Saturn. Eddie ended up having some kind of complication, and he passed earlier than they expected. So, yeah.
It happens.
Mm-hmm. It does, because they're still susceptible to different diseases and stuff, as are all dogs and animals. So,
and people. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about Roselle. Like, how did that bond? How did you meet her and start bonding with her?
Well, I have gotten all of my guide dogs from Guide Dogs for the Blind, which has now 2 campuses, one in California in San Rafael and another one in Boring, Oregon. Love the name. Mm-hmm. And I've been using guide dogs from them since 1964, and I've described the training process. In 1999, my 4th guide dog, who had only worked 3 years, became ill. Her name was Linny. Yeah. She became ill with a kidney disease that we think was a kind of morphing of Lyme's disease, because Linny had been bit by a tick in, I think, the fall of 1996 or the spring of 1997. Mm-hmm. And 2 years later, she became very ill and couldn't guide anymore. So we got Roselle in November of 1999. Mm-hmm. And I went and trained with her at Guide Dogs for the Blind in California. She was a wonderful dog. I learned as a puppy, loved to go steal socks and slippers and hide them. She wouldn't chew them up. She'd hide them. And she did that to us some, but it was part of her game. She also snored when she slept. So, but she was also a dog. And one of the things that I asked for was this characteristic. I said, I want a dog with an on-off switch. I want a dog that knows that when the harness is on, work is the only thing that really is important. Mm-hmm. And when the harness comes off, then you can play. Yeah. And Roselle was perfect at that.
Well, that's good, because you want them to have that enjoyable playtime too, not be in work mode all the time.
Oh, yeah. And, one of the things that I'm constantly asked is, can I pet your dog? Yeah. And I will always say no, as long as the harness is on. But if I have time, I'll stop and take the harness off and say, now you can pet the dog. And I will usually do that if I'm in a store and a child wants to pet the dog and the mother usually goes, oh, no, that dog might bite. I will always stop, take the harness off and say, no, the dog won't bite. But I hope that your child isn't eating any food, because dogs will be dogs and the dog will want to take advantage of that. But they love attention, so let them visit. And when the harness comes off, the tail starts to wag 100 miles a second anyway. But every dog that I use is very much encouraged to know when that harness is on, it's work. Mm-hmm. At any time. I've had a few people who come up and say, can I pet your dog? And I say no, because I'm trying to go somewhere. And as I start to continue to move past, suddenly the dog's head is swerving, and I can feel that through the leash and all that. Mm-hmm. And I will immediately drop the harness and give a tug on the leash and say, leave it. And people have said, why are you yelling at the dog? I didn't do what you said. I started petting the dog. I said, no, you don't understand. You got the dog in trouble. I'll deal with the dog, and then I'll deal with you. You shouldn't have pet the dog, but you got the dog in trouble. And that's why when I say no, I mean no. Yeah. But mostly, I will always try to find enough time to stop and let people visit, because it is a relaxation time for the dog as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's good for you both, because you get to talk and share a little more of your story with everybody too.
Sure.
So, with publishing Thunderdog and everything, what have been some of the takeaways or things that you've learned along the way post-publishing the book?
I think that several things. One, it crystallized in my mind even more the value of letting the dog have time to relax by taking the harness off, but also recognizing that I need to be in control of those situations. It has given me the opportunity to engage in a lot of discussions like this, And it has added a lot to me being able to travel and speak to organizations and people literally around the world to help educate them about blindness and guide dogs, but also, as we discussed earlier, teamwork and trust and leadership and a number of different kinds of things. I've done some speeches on ethics and making choices, but it's given me the opportunity to see more of the world, and especially a lot, of course, of the United States, and enjoy so many different areas and so many different parts of our country, which is such a great place to visit everywhere and deal with all of that.
Yeah, one of my bucket list is to visit all 50 states. So, and I hope that I can also take my son, now that he's here, to visit majority of those states. He's already got quite a few under his belt just from us doing family trips.
Where do you live now?
I'm still in Oklahoma, so I
You're in
haven't
Oklahoma.
traveled very far, kind of close to the Oklahoma City area. But he's been to New Mexico, Missouri, Texas, Arkansas. Where else have we gone?
I think I have now done all 50 states, which is great, which I've enjoyed and looking forward to visiting more of them again.
Yeah.
My father was from Dewey, Oklahoma, and we've been to Oklahoma several times, and I've spoken in Oklahoma a number of times. So it's wonderful to be able to come there.
Yes, and Dewey is actually kind of a small town. I have a friend that I met in college, and he was from Dewey, and I think he moved back in that direction. Now that he's married, he's got some kids and stuff. They live, I think they're in Bartlesville now, so which is just kind of right next to it almost. But
I've not been to Dewey, but one of these days we'll have to go there and see what I can discover.
Yeah, that is awesome. Another fun little question for you about your journey as an author. What has been the biggest challenge for you?
You know, as much as I talk about blindness and try to teach people about that, it's discovering that some people don't get it. So, for example, a few years ago, well, actually now it's probably about 9 years ago, we were living up in the Bay Area of California in a town called Novato, Novato. And the Novato Book Club invited me to come and speak and talk about Thunderdog, which I did. And they made it very clear they've all read Thunderdog, they all enjoyed it, and they wanted to talk about it. So I went and I talked a little bit, and then we opened it for questions. And the very first question from someone was, well, what were you doing in the World Trade Center? Now, that's pretty clear if you read the book.
Yeah.
But what were you doing there? How can a blind person work in the World Trade Center? That's what the book is all about. Some people don't absorb content as well as others. So that's a challenge sometimes.
I believe that. And just to question why and maybe that's me not thinking like somebody who has not been around others with disabilities and everything, or any other challenging things they've had going on with their life. But I just feel like that question should not have even been asked, because everybody has to work.
Well, but everyone was supposed to have read the book. So that question is answered throughout the entire book, of course.
Yeah.
So the fact is that sometimes people just want to continue to resist changing their misconceptions or their preconceived notions. And so that gets to be an issue.
Yes. Which pushing and like fighting change, that doesn't work for anybody, because change is how you grow.
So. Well, change is all around us. And the fact is, no matter, we usually say, yeah, we understand that change is everywhere, but we don't like to change. And again, that's something that we've been taught, and we shouldn't change just for the sake of change, but we do need to be aware of ourselves, our surroundings, and recognize and appreciate the value of change from time to time. It is important, and it is something that's going to be part of what we do.
Yeah. And even if you're afraid of change, like just take a deep breath and keep moving forward.
Yeah. And you may decide I'm not going to change, but make that a decision, make that a conscious decision based on what is change going to do for me in this case, whatever that happens to be. And it may also mean that you will suddenly discover, oh, there's more value to change than I thought. September 11th was one of the defining moments for all of us in our world. September 11th happened. And the reality is, when people, even sometimes I've heard recently talk about, well, we had to get back to normal after September 11th. The answer is no, we don't. Normal would never be the same again.
And it wasn't.
Many things. And it wasn't, and it isn't. And normal is something that goes on in our lives all the time. We're dealing now in this country with with so many different issues. We're so fractured in our beliefs. And one of the changes that we really need to make is, no matter who it is that we listen to, we should take the time to truly evaluate ourselves and not just arbitrarily trust what anyone says, which doesn't mean that we're not going to learn to trust them, but we really need to evaluate for ourselves what is going on with whatever people say, because there are just too many examples where people have constantly betrayed trusts. I mean, after September 11th, for example, we had a time where everyone was very unified because of what occurred. But then some things happened. Enron, the oil industry, MCI WorldCom, there were some fraudulent things and so on. And slowly we started to drift away. But the message that we should have gotten from all that is, it's appropriate and okay to really look at things for ourselves rather than just trusting what others say. And that's especially true today because so many people do have their own agendas. And the fact is that trust is under attack in so many ways in our country today and in our world. People keep saying, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. They don't. Don't accept that. The fact of the matter is, I believe that all of us truly need to look at facts for ourselves. And data for ourselves and make conscious decisions, but don't just listen to what anyone says. Our political leaders are great examples of people who really need to demonstrate that they deserve our trust. And all too often we don't see that. People just say, I trust them because they're of this party or that party. Don't. And I don't care which party it is, or what party, if there are several that you want to talk about. Verify yourselves, really think things through, because it's the only way that we can make intelligent decisions today.
Agreed, because those are just labels for people that are still people. They've made mistakes. They have their own thoughts and beliefs and things they want to do. And it's, like you said, it's up to us to fact check things and see what they're really about, whether we're going to put them out there and let them help us or not,
Well, and here's another point. People talk about dogs and they say dogs love unconditionally. And I absolutely buy that. I think they do. Unless they're so abused that they shut you out. But dogs do not trust unconditionally. Dogs want to trust. And the difference between dogs and people is that dogs are open to trust, where we don't trust anymore. We just decide we're going to accept what someone says. We don't go through a process of saying, this is what so-and-so has done to me, or this is what I've observed so-and-so doing. Should I trust that person based on my own understanding of what trust is all about? And that's true whether you're working with people at a company or electing people or whatever the case happens to be. And by the way, if we truly look at what people do, and we find that the credibility is there, then we can trust.
Yeah.
But if we find that trust is being betrayed, then we should really individually make the decision, I'm not going to really just necessarily trust that person.
Yeah. And
But
it's
we should
hard
be open to trust, but we have
Yeah.
to be open to the concept of trust.
Yeah, and it's hard to get people to get behind that whole thought process too. And even like you mentioned the whole animal thing, like there are animals. I'm going to use my foster fail rescue pet that I've got. We got him and he was very, very anxious. He's like a Chihuahua mix. And I'm not 100% sure about the life he had before he was picked up by the rescue and I ended up with him. But he had missing teeth. He was very, very shy of any quick movement. Still kind of is, but I think he was roughed up really, really bad. But it took him a very, very long time to trust anybody but me and my son for a very long time. So
we had a dog that we adopted, was a dog when I worked at Guide Dogs for the Blind. We were asked to foster care. It was an old dog. She was 12, and Panama had been sent back to the school because the family said, well, we can't keep this dog anymore. The dog came back filthy, dirty.
Oh my gosh.
Tuned people out. It had a big lump on her back. And they said the dog is deaf because they literally dropped a Webster's dictionary next to the dog and the dog didn't respond. And they asked if we would just keep this dog and see what could be done. The lump was an infected cyst, so we got that. They drained it, and so that was okay. But it took months to even discover that the dog was not totally deaf. The dog was probably partially deaf, 12 years old. But the dog just tuned everything out because she had to have been abused. But we finally developed a relationship with Panama. My wife, Karen, who has been in a wheelchair her whole life, would take Panama for walks, and Panama was reluctant to go at first. But Karen just kind of almost pulled her along, and Panama kind of went, okay, I guess, and eventually just really warmed up to it. She became a very loving dog. But it took a while to re-earn, or not re-earn, but for us to earn her trust and for us to be very patient with her. And she became an absolute integral part of our lives and was with us for 3 years until she finally just got too old.
Yeah.
But she was a wonderful friend in the family. She was kind of too old to play. She had arthritis, so she didn't play with Roselle. And then when we also got another dog that was a breeder for guide dogs who was pretty young, Panama wouldn't play with her either because she just couldn't keep up with them, but she loved to watch. And she loved to visit, and they all liked her. So it was a good family. And we had a cat, and the cat got along with the dogs too. So it worked out well. But it was a matter of earning that trust and building it and saying, we are not going to betray a trust with you.
I'm so glad you guys got her, because that's heartbreaking. I cannot stand people that are abusive to animals. Like it makes me very upset, angry, and like,
I hear you.
Animal and just run with it. Like, nope, you don't even deserve this kind creature because you're not taking care of it.
Yeah, I hear you. Absolutely. But the relationship was great. We have wonderful memories with her, and I hope she had good memories with us. And it worked out pretty well.
Oh man. Animals are so precious. Well, Mike, we have reached the end of our time. So go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can kind of keep up with you and find your books, especially with the books coming out.
Well, they can always go to my website, Michael Hingson, MichaelHingson.com. There's a contact form on there if they want to reach out. I respond to any emails that I get. And I hope that if people hear this and want someone to come and speak to their organization, that they will reach out. They can also email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. And I respond to all emails. Thunderdog is available wherever books are sold. It was published by Thomas Nelson, which is now part of HarperCollins.
Oh,
and it is readily available anywhere you get books. And our second book, Running with Roselle, that we haven't talked about a lot, which I wrote for kids, but more adults buy than kids, which talks a lot more about me growing up and Roselle growing up than talking about the World Trade Center. It is available through Amazon. We self-published Running with Roselle.
Oh, yay.
And A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave is a ways out from coming, but we'll definitely be mentioning it on the website when it comes out, and also on blindedbyfear.net. When there's more information on that, we will spread it through there as well. But I hope that some of the people here want a speaker. It's how we keep the dog and cat in food. So anyone who needs a speaker, I'd love to chat with you, and we will work with you. I customize every talk that I give, and when I go to speak somewhere, we figure out what the fee is going to be. I work with budgets, but I don't charge by the talk. So I have gone to places where we've done a number of events in 1 or 2 days, even though the original expectation was 1 or 2 talks. I will work with people along the line, because I figure that when I go to speak, I'm a guest. And it's not my job to make their life difficult, but to inspire or to educate. One of the favorite breakout speeches I give a lot is called Moving from Diversity to Inclusion, which really discusses the fact that diversity has left out disabilities. But the fact of the matter is that inclusion can't. You can't say, well, we include these people. We are not inclusive then. You can't get away from leaving out disabilities. You can't leave out disabilities if you're going to talk about being inclusive. But anyway, I'd love to talk with anyone who's looking for a speaker. I hope people will go get Thunderdog. And if they have questions or want to reach out, go to michaelhingson.com. Would love to hear from you.
Yes, definitely check them out, guys. Snag those books. Check out some more of his work. All of his speeches, his talks are listed on his website. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe while you're here.
Please, yes.
We appreciate you listening and watching. And Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on today.
It's been a pleasure. I'm really honored that you took the time to have us on, and if we can ever help in the future. By the way, we also do a podcast called Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. So we should talk about having you on the podcast, but if anyone wants to explore that, you can go to michaelhingson.com/podcast, and we'd love you to let us know if you'd like to be a guest. It's a podcast that allows people to tell their stories, challenges, and things that they've dealt with in their lives. We have conversations about it. So always looking for guests for Unstoppable Mindset as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be awesome. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to get future notifications when shows come out. Also, be sure to check out my website. I have a blog featuring this creative with some other fun and interesting questions. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there to stay up to date with all things the Chapter Goddess in Madeline Dale. Once again, thanks for watching and have a great rest of the day.